LeeAnne, you got in. Are you the host? Who's the host?
I'm guessing Lindsay.
Ah,
Or yeah.
I'm not sure. I kind of got assigned to this right at the last second.
Happy Oats Day.
yep. I tried just logging in about 10 minutes ago and I'm like, oh no, Panic at the Disco.
I'm gonna do a quick sound check. Can you all hear me? Like volume, clarity?
Sounds great.
Good.
Okay, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you guys all sound great.
But wait till we start harmonizing.
I know a couple of rounds we could do.
I've got a couple of sea shanties.
I'll send Rye a little note and be like, make
Yeah.
sure you log on. I think he's the only presenter we don't have.
Yeah, I'll send him an email now.
Okay.
And then I missed part of our dry run. Can you remind me how much time we all have? I don't think I'm going to use all my time anyway, but just
6 minutes.
Okay.
Also, I realized I have I have a large part of the session and my presentation is like less than 40 minutes. So if you guys go over, don't worry about that.
So is the whole thing an hour and a half or something like that?
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Yep, Natasha's been added at the end of our presentation because we have a grant for that and we have a partner for that.
Oh,
Oh,
fun.
nice.
Natasha.
Hi,
Hello.
yeah. And I'm gonna pull in a little bit about some federal opportunities. So
Great.
it's like things that you aren't covering. I'm like federal partners, like how to get some stuff in your local budget. So
Mhm.
We have sort of like we have built in 10 minutes for questions before we pass it off, but does it make sense to just save all the questions for the end, or how do you feel, Natasha, about us doing about 10 minutes of questions before we pass it off?
I like having a midway point for questions. So just so people don't forget, I always forget my questions by the end.
Awesome.
And then we can leave time at the end too, and people can ask questions of you guys or me at the end.
Okay.
As well.
And I think, Alan, you are going to hop off a little early for your dog, a doggy vet appointment.
Yeah, but I have to pick up my dog by 5, so around 20 till 5 I have to go.
And Lindsay, do you run the slides or do we run our own slides? Or
I think whichever is easiest for you is fine with me. I'm happy to give co-presenter power to anyone.
Alan sent me our slides so I can run them. And I don't have Alan sent me the slides so I can run them if you want.
Sure, I will make you a co-host.
Okay. And Lindsay, do you kind of monitor the chat or do you want support in that? What's your?
Yeah, I'll kind of monitor it, but feel free to keep an eye on it as well in case I miss anything.
Cool. Can do.
Awesome. And then we have we have a grant for that, correct? Perfect.
And it sounds like Zal won't make it. Heidi, is that right? Is she sick?
Caregiving
Oh.
situation.
I'm going to practice sharing the screen and just see if it works.
Raya is asking for a video and audio controls.
Oops,
Yep.
sorry, I was muted.
Oh.
I'll give you co-host abilities as well.
Yep.
Perfect. So you're managing the second presentation, I assume. So should be all good.
I think we have Baerg as a guest and not as a presenter.
Okay. Let's see. It says Rise a co-host now, so should be ready.
He says, yeah, he put in there, can you give me video and audio control? So he's
Hmm.
having a hard time getting that.
Hmm.
And I
Oh,
can't do it on my
it's
end.
logged out, so.
Maybe he's gonna log out and log back in.
Yeah.
Let's try again. Right, make a co-host. All right, so that should work.
Give it a try, right?
They're working. Otherwise, worst case, you can send me your presentation and yeah, I'm happy to control things as well, whatever is easiest.
Rye's presentation is integrated into we have a grant for that. So he
Okay.
just needs to be able to speak.
Perfect.
Says when he clicks on the video and audio buttons, they don't do anything.
Anything. Huh.
That sounds like probably a Zoom or like a computer like permissions issue with your Zoom would be my guess. Do you use Zoom regularly?
Yes.
Interesting. It might be that you have to restart your computer. That's the only thing I can think of. Is sometimes if things don't play nice and they usually play nice, then yeah. All right.
Thanks, Roy.
Okay, so I will admit folks now if we are ready. Feel free to pull up your slides.
Oh, no, let me-
Okay, letting everyone in now. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today at the 2023 Oregon Active Transportation Summit, Move into Action. This hour and a half, we are going to have two presentations. We have a grant for that and partnerships and funding to pay for safe walking and biking infrastructure. So first up, we have a grant for that. So go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Lindsay. My name is LeeAnne Fergason. I work for the Oregon Department of Transportation. I am the Strategic Investments Manager, and I have a slate of ODOT grant managers to introduce to you all today. I'll kind of have people introduce themselves in the order in which you'll hear them speaking. Alan, do you want to go first?
Sure, I'm Alan Thompson. I'm the Oregon Community Pass Program Manager.
And then Heidi.
I'm Heidi Manlove. I'm Safe Routes to School Program Manager.
Awesome. We also have Baerg, who is having a little bit of technical difficulty, so he's going to join us in just a second. He's from our climate office. And Dorian.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dorian Pacheco. I'm the Innovative Mobility Program Manager. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm part of ODOT's Public Transportation Division.
And we actually have one more speaker on the second half of our presentation, and I feel like we should go ahead and have her introduce herself now too, if you don't mind, Natasha.
Yeah, sure. My name is Natasha Riveron. I'm the Healthy Parks and Places Manager at Safe Routes Partnership, which is a national organization working on walking and biking.
Awesome. And it looks like Rye has joined us. Rye, we're going to do an audio and visual check at the same time as you are introducing yourself to this fine crowd.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Excellent. Hello, everyone. My name is Baerg, and I'm with the Climate Office at ODOT, and I will be talking to you today about the Carbon Reduction Program.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for doing the introductions. We're excited to have everybody here, all of our guests. And if you can, please put in the chat if you've ever had an ODOT grant before. We're curious a little bit about you. please add in the chat if you've ever had an ODOT grant with us. And also feel free to add in the chat if there's anything that you're really interested in today, while you're joining this presentation, anything you're interested in learning. Also, while we're presenting, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll have about 10 minutes after the ODOT presentation before Natasha gives us another presentation, and we'll kind of call through the chat and look for questions in there. So feel free to start populating that in the chat. All right, we'll get started. The first presentation is we have a grant for that. So we just met some of our grant managers, Heidi, Dorian, Rye, Alan, and Alan's going to go over a little bit of what those grants are and how you can apply at a really high level, kind of all of the ODOT grants that we can think of that folks can apply for. Then we will do a couple of spotlights on some of our grants. So our Safe Routes to School grant, Heidi will cover, Dorian will cover the Innovative Mobility Program, and Rye will cover the CRP, Climate Reduction Program. Is that it? Carbon reduction.
Carbon reduction.
That makes way more sense than climate reduction. And then we'll have time at the end for questions. So I'll pass it off to Alan.
All right.
To kick us off.
All right, thanks. First off, we'll be talking an awful lot about acronyms, and we're so used to them that they just become the default name, like IMP. We just call it the IMP or the FLAP or STIF, OCP. And so we apologize. We're throwing these all at you. There's going to be a lot of acronyms. It's like a cartoon where you're just getting all these things thrown at you. So we'll explain what every one of these things are. Next slide, please. So who we are, we're ODOT. We're the Public Transit Division and the Climate Office. We have Safe Routes to School. We have Oregon Community Pass. We have Innovative Mobility and Carbon Reduction. And Heidi is part of Safe Routes to School, but she's in a different department, and she'll explain that later. Next slide, please. So here are some of our available grants, and we're not going to talk about all of them today, but these are some we do have. We have the Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund, which we mentioned as the STIF, the Small City Allotment, which is a grant for smaller cities less than 5,000. Safe Routes to School, both state and federal. That there's both construction and education. My program, the Oregon Community Pass, is both state and federal. Notice how we have these color coded. The Innovative Mobility Program was also state and federal. Congestion mitigation and air quality, believe it or not, can actually be used for some active transportation. That's all federal. The Federal Lands Access Program, or FLAP, that is federally funded, and we can use active transportation projects in that with the various restrictions. And of course, Carbon Reduction Program, which is also federal funding. Next slide, please. And here's a sample matrix of what things can be done through it. And recognize that each of our programs have various limitations and caveats as they come into play. So for example, the bike ped program under roadway rehabilitation, it's required that be happening whenever a road is rehabilitated. The question is how do you define it? We have traffic calming can be done with CMAQ, congestion mitigation air quality, or the carbon reduction program. We have bike lanes, sidewalks, crosswalks, all can be funded with Community Pass, but there are restrictions on things being separated. New expanded bus service, can be funded through transit, it can be funded through CMAQ, it can be funded through micromobility capital improvements. So there's a whole host of things, and I can spend an hour on this slide alone. So let's just go to the next slide, please. So who's eligible? So these are the ones that we're not going to be talking about today. And so this is where we get into some of the limitations. So for CMAQ, these are non-attainment or maintenance areas as identified by the federal government. And you'll find that it could be the Portland area, Salem, Kaiser, Eugene, and a couple of small, very rural areas around Klamath Falls. And those are primarily caused by wood burning stoves. There's money available. It's federal. There is a match requirement. And what types of projects? Specific congestion reduction or air quality projects. So if you are looking at a bike lane or a bike path or a multi-use path that can be shown that would reduce, that would have a net reduction in a net improvement to air quality, then that will work, and you can apply as provided that you're one of those eligible areas. For the FLAP, the Federal Lands Access Program, that is for the areas that are touching or within federal lands. And Oregon has one of the highest ratios of land mass to population. I think it's like 36% of all the land in Oregon is considered federal. I think Alaska is the only one that's higher. So there's money for that, about 33 million annually. You have to partner with a federal land agency to work that project. It has to connect to touch federal lands. It's about every 2 years, and your contact is your federal partner. Small city allotment, incorporated cities of 5,000 population. It's $5 million every year, $100,000 maximum. There is no match, which is the good news. And it's on road for safety, capacity, urchin preservation, and of course, you can find that there will be drainage and sidewalks and bike lanes that can be part of this. Dean Edgar, her contact information is below. The STIF, Statewide Transportation Infrastructure Fund, as qualified entities are public transit providers, so it just goes to them. But active transportation, first mile, last mile, these things can come into play. Projects that improve, expand, or maintain services. And Frank Thomas is the interim program manager for that. Next slide, please. And turn it over to Heidi.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I see a few familiar names in the attendance list. So I work at ODOT in the Transportation Safety Office, which is a service office of DMV. We used to have our own division, and now we've been incorporated into DMV, but we still do the same work in providing behavior side of transportation safety. And so I work in the bicycle and pedestrian safety programming, as well as Safe Routes to School education programming. So the education program is also known as the non-infrastructure. And then today, my partner Zhao couldn't be with us, so I'm just going to cover her side of the program because it's all one holistic program anyhow. Next slide, please. So in talking about Safe Routes to School being a holistic program, it's not just an ODOT program in the state, right? There's lots of different key partners and players that play a role. So as LeeAnne used to always say, it takes a village, right? So we have a lot of folks both internally in ODOT, but also externally that we partner with to program Safe Routes to School in Oregon. And then there's lots of folks who the Oregon program doesn't even touch, that's already doing Safe Routes to School programming on their own, or have had grants a long time ago and doesn't really need our funding anymore. So Safe Routes to School in Oregon comes in all different shapes and sizes, in large cities, small towns, rural areas. And so we have lots of partners, not only just in Safe Routes, but also transportation options. So it's a large group of people that work on Safe Routes to School here in Oregon, both locally and regionally. Next slide. So our vision is pretty simple, to give kids now K through 12, or so students, youth K through 12, safe, accessible ways to get to school and to and from school. So our vision is investing in both construction and education encouragement programs, prioritizing communities who have been historically underserved, and then also trying to give program resources and support statewide. So even if we don't offer grants to every community, right, because we can't, but we try to at least offer some sort of resources either regionally through our technical assistance hubs or through resources that we provide on our website, which I'll share in a little bit. We also build and leverage partnerships with agencies, schools, and organizations, big or small, and we commit to this transparent communication and evaluation that engage to engage and support our communities. Next slide. So just to give you an example of our funding and where we fund projects currently. So right now we're working in our most recent funding cycle, which is the 23-24 federal fiscal year for my side. And so we have like the blue dots are 13 programs that were selected for project identification for the 23-24 year. The red are construction projects, 26 of them. Orange are the education tier 1 communities, which are 5. The yellow are 5 education plus, which are like kind of the second level of education grants. And then the innovation grants, we have 3 innovation grants. So these 3 tiers of the education program are new this current round. So we had $32 million in construction funds and $1.8 million allocated for the education funding. So for this current cycle. Next slide. So our next grant, so we go on a 2-year grant cycle. So our next grant solicitation will go out in February of 2024 to start in October of 2023. So it's on the federal fiscal year. I'm sorry, 2020. So February 2024 for October 2025. So we have both the education and the construction grants are on the same cycle. So next slide. So in talking about the current the eligibility. So for the construction side, school districts, cities, counties, transit districts, tribes, and road authorities can apply. And very similar for the education grants, also including education service districts into this for the education side. So not just school districts, but education service districts as well. And so for the construction side, $60,000 to $2 million is the limit on projects, or is the amount we have for projects. And then and then for the education side, we have $1 million annually for projects. So this next cycle, the education side has approximately $2 million to allocate for the next funding cycle, which is a bit more than we had in this current cycle. So 40% match for the infrastructure or the construction grants, and this can be reduced based on if you have a community smaller than 5,000, show a high risk crashes, and a couple other stipulations, which you can get approved to get a reduced match lower than 40%. And then for the non-infrastructure, it's a 12% match, but this can be a hard match or something what they also call as a soft match, which could be things like volunteer work or some kind of like community donations to the program. So eligibility between the programs, what is eligible? Safety projects for the construction side, public right-of-way within 1 mile of the school, and non-infrastructure programs to address barriers to students walking and rolling. So non-infrastructure basically takes all the things that we can think of that have nothing to do with road construction. So education programs, hiring a coordinator, working on encouragement, trying to do some coordination between the construction side and the education side, working on public engagement, outreach, working with students and parents and school staff. So it's there's a lot of different things in the non-infrastructure side. And then, of course, our funding cycle is every 2 years, and our next application is for will be out in 2024. Next slide. So this is for planning assistance for the construction side. So these are not grants, but they do go every 2 years, and these are to help folks basically get ready and be grant ready so that they can build a plan, a Safe Routes to School plan. And this is not a grant, it's actually just consultant services that ODOT provides for you in order to do an assessment of your community and build a Safe Routes to School plan. So all communities are eligible, but we do prioritize communities that do not have planning capacity. So that one will be available in 2024 as well. So if you have any questions, you can contact either myself or Zhao, depending on your topic, if it's about education or non-infrastructure grants. And then Zhao's Sal Posadas can be contacted for the construction grants. I would also recommend, if you aren't already, to sign up for our both our Gov delivery list, the ODOT Gov delivery list, which can be found on our ODOT page, or you could also sign up for our newsletter, which is through our Oregon Safe Routes to School.org page. I think that's on the next slide. Maybe. Is there another one after that? No, okay, we changed it up. So you can go to OregonSafeRoutes.org or just Google Oregon Safe Routes to School, and you'll find both the ODOT's page as well as the OregonSafeRoutes.org page. So both of those are helpful in terms of knowing the next cycle and getting announcements about the next funding cycle. And we can go to the next presenter.
Hi, everyone. It's back to me again. Next slide, please. Hi, everyone. Oregon Community Pass is a competitive grant program. It's new. We had our first cycle in 2020. It invests in biking and walking facilities that are off system, meaning that primarily not along a roadway. And this is important because historically, active transportation projects were funded through the through gas taxes, and the state constitution prohibits Oregon from spending any highway tax funds on anything other than what's on a highway. So this is the first time that ODOT has really gone out and started finding funding for things that are not along the roadway. We look at two different things. One are critical links, and I look at this as like a first mile, last mile to everywhere. So biking and walking connections to schools. So we really complement Safe Routes to School. Downtowns, shopping, employment, and other destinations. So it's transportation related. It is not a recreational purpose. It has to serve a transportation purpose. The other one is regional paths. These are long distance paths that connect communities. And we think of how Oregon's Bear Creek Greenway or Portland Spring Water Corridor. And these can serve a dual use where there is some recreation, but also some utilitarian transportation as well. And then, of course, crossings, because you can't have them stop just at a street, and sometimes they just have to cross. Next slide, please. So our very first cycle, we had $15 million, and we have 6 that were preliminary planning and 15 are construction. So when we say preliminary planning, that is the first 30% design, and the other and then we have full construction. So if you're doing construction, we don't do it in phases. The project must go to construction. You can't just do PE. You can't just do right of way or environmental. So it has to go all the way to construction. And the reason for that is we're using a lot of federal funds, and we want to make sure that these projects are fully funded and that the applicants don't have to reimburse the federal government for funds spent if by chance they decide not to pursue actual construction if you do pre-construction planning. So we had 1.5 million for planning and 13.7 million for construction, and this is what all we funded in the 2020 cycle. Next slide, please. So next cycle coming up. Now we have a cycle that's just finished right now. It's going to go to the Oregon Transportation Commission in July. So that is the 2022 cycle. So this is biennial. This is every 2 years. So the next cycle will start in August of next year. And this is what we have. We have close to about $30 million in funding for this upcoming cycle. So we basically more than doubled our funding from what we had before the last cycle. So when we do planning, it's 150,000 to 750,000. Construction is 200,000 to 1 million for state funds. And so we look at that as like a small construction one, because state has some requirements of 30% match, whereas 10.27% for federal. So it'll, because of the requirements for feds, for federal funding, the reporting requirements, the administrative requirements, it costs a lot more. So that's why we have federal funds as a much higher burden. And if you are not a certified agency, and there's only 11 in the state certified to manage federal projects by ODOT, then ODOT will administer the contract for you. So, or one of the other 11s if you're within their jurisdiction, such as Multnomah County. But we can find that out on the website. When we talk about planning the first 30%, the key thing there is that if you're thinking about a project and it's a brand new project and you haven't done any prior work before, so there's no, you have to start from the very beginning, from planning to construction. It's best to do the preliminary planning, the $150,000 to $750,000 one, because what we found in the last cycle is that applicants would come in with this funding based upon their estimates, which were not very accurate, and we've had to either downscope or cancel the projects. So by doing the preliminary planning, the 150,000 to 750,000, we call it a project refinement, then that allows the products that we want out of that are the technical scoping sheet, which gives all the pricing, a guaranteed budget within construction years so that we know how to escalate for inflation, and an environmental prospectus where there's an idea of how any environmental issues that may be coming up without getting too deep into NEPA. So, and by doing that, you're totally prepared at that point to apply for a construction grant later on. So we strongly encourage people who are just starting to start with that preliminary planning. We call it project refinement. So priorities off system, it's every 2 years. The next application cycle starts August of next year. It'll be a pre-application where we look at eligibility, and if we have any major questions, and we can talk to you before you fill out an application. And then the application will be in November of 2024 through January of 2025. And then we go through the whole spring of reviewing, looking at costs, getting it to the Oregon Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee. They make their recommendations to the OTC. OTC makes their approval of the projects, and then we execute. So it's a long, drawn out process, but it's the process we have. All right, next slide, please. So here's my contact information. If you have any questions, the link down there is oregon.gov/OCP. If you just Google Oregon Community Pass, it'll be the first thing that pops up. And with that, I'll go on to the next person.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Baerg with the ODOT Climate Office. I'm going to be talking to you about the carbon reduction program. Next slide, please. So this is a new federal program that was created under the bipartisan infrastructure law. And it's got a total of $82 million for Oregon over 5 fiscal years, 2022 through 2026. The bill, the bipartisan infrastructure law, divides the funding between a few different geographic areas. So we've got the transportation management areas, which get about 28 million, the small urban rural areas, which get about 24 million, and the statewide portion, which gets about 29 million. And it also requires ODOT to develop a carbon reduction strategy to discuss how the state is reducing carbon emissions from the transportation sector. The portion I'm going to be focusing on today is that kind of middle area, the small urban and rural area call for projects, but I can answer questions on the other ones as well. The next slide. So ODOT has developed a call for project strategy for this portion of the funds. We have 13 million available this year. Those applications are due on May 31st, and we opened that at the end of February. The remainder, the 11 million, will be done in a second call for projects in 2024. So if you don't get in this year, there should still be some funding next year. This funding is for areas of the state with, so urban and rural areas of the state with less than 200,000 residents. So that excludes the Portland Metro, Eugene, and Salem areas. Those are all fall into that transportation management area bucket, and they get to decide what they're spending those funds on. The TMAs do in those areas. Cities, counties, tribal governments, and transportation agencies are all eligible for this funding. And the match for projects is 10.27%. Next slide. The carbon reduction program is a broad umbrella program under the bill, and it can actually fund things from a number of different federal programs, such as STBG or CMAQ, both of which have been discussed today. But I'm going to focus just on the kind of active transportation elements primarily here. But do note that we can also fund things like electric vehicles and charging stations, as well as system operations, things like signals and adaptive timing and things like that. So on the active transportation side of things, we're looking for projects that will create mode shift and reduce emissions, carbon emissions from our transportation system. So we have a few options here. We can support public transportation by first and last mile improvements. We can also do some transportation demand management type programs, so incentives and things like that. And then we can invest in strategic active transportation networks, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second, as well as the capital portions of micromobility and scooter and bike share type projects. We're still waiting to hear back from FHWA on whether or not we can fund bike share operations. On the strategic portion, as you've heard, we have some other funding opportunities here at ODOT. So we're looking for those types of projects that you wouldn't probably fund under Safe Routes to School or our Community Paths program, but specifically types of projects that are going to lead to some mode shift and a reduction in emissions. So we're looking for things that are probably in more heavily populated areas, connecting to trip centers and destinations. And these could be things like intersection improvements to do gap closures and things of that nature. So that's what we're looking for in terms of active transportation for this program. Next slide. As I mentioned, the projects for this program do have to reduce those greenhouse gas emissions. And specifically, when you're looking at our application, we're looking for those projects that will reduce the most emissions and reduce those emissions sooner. Next slide. So just going over one more time, this is the high-level summary here. Cities, counties, tribal governments, and transportation agencies such as ports or transit providers can apply for this funding. We're looking for areas representing populations of less than 200,000. We have 24 million over 2 funding cycles with a 10.27% match. And then we're looking for those strategic active transportation type projects. Next slide. Here you can find my contact information. That's Rye, R-Y-E, Baerg, B-A-E-R-G @odot.org and .gov. Or you can find my contact information on the climate website as well if you search for a carbon reduction program. With that, thank you, and I'll pass it on to the next presenter.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Dorian Pacheco. I'm
Really
the
quick, you had a question that came in. Do you want to answer that before going to the next presentation or save it for the end?
I think we decided to save them for the end. Is that
Okay.
okay, Rye? Okay, we just have one more program on the ODOT side, and then we'll do a couple questions, and then we'll pass it off to the Safe Routes Partnership.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to start over. Hello, everyone. My name is Dorian Pacheco. I'm the Innovative Mobility Program Manager. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm part of ODOT's Public Transportation Division. Next slide, please. All right, so the Innovative Mobility Program is a very new program at ODOT that is still in the planning and design phase. The program goal is to increase historically underserved communities' access to public and active transportation. And we'll be doing that by providing funding to a very wide range of organizations, including but not limited to nonprofits, local and regional governments, and transportation providers. Program goals also include delivering within ODOT's climate and equity lenses, building organizational capacity, and removing barriers to accessing funds, as well as removing barriers to accessing transportation in itself. Next slide, please. The IMP has $20 million in available funding through 2027. 10 million are through state TOF funds, which are incredibly flexible state funds. The other half, or the other 10 million, are through the Federal Highway Administration. Specifically, that type of funding are surface block transportation grants. And this funding was allocated through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Is the primary criteria for funding decisions, as the program has a very strong focus on historically excluded groups. And as I mentioned, the program has not yet been fully stood up, but some projects may include van pool for low-wage, shift, and seasonal workers, bike and scooter lending libraries, minor infrastructure projects like bus stop improvements, micromobility, and first/last mile connections. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a visual which shows the program's general schedule. It runs from left to right. So you can see that phase one included some initial outreach and engagement, as well as the opening of some $5,000 micro grants, which I'll talk about on the next slide. Phase two is where we are now, which is program design. We've been developing requests for proposals for support services, which will include technical assistance for grant awardees and grant applicants. We've also established a technical advisory committee to give us feedback on program design and implementation. And as of now, we're continuing to develop the program with community consultants and the advisory committee. Phase three is where we'll be launching the competitive grants, which I'll also talk about on the next slide. At the same time, we expect to have those contracted services ready to ensure that applicants have support and that grant awardees also have access to support throughout the life cycle of their grants. Phase four is delivery, and we anticipate awarding funding to the first round awardees in the winter and spring of 2024. Lastly, you can see that there's an arrow running across this visual that indicates ongoing engagement. That's because we believe that community engagement should not be one time or only as part of the program's design phase. Rather, community engagement should be iterative and ongoing throughout the life cycle of the program. And so taking this approach will ensure that we can address community needs, not only as we lift off the program, but over time as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are our funding opportunities. The IMP offers micro grants for up to $5,000. Those are available on a rolling basis with no deadline for application. The micro grants are paid upfront with no request for reimbursement or requirements for match funding. You can find the application and our program guidance on the IMP website. To date, ODOT has awarded over 50 micro grants totaling over $235,000. And these micro grants are funded solely through state funds to give organizations greater flexibility with the scope of their projects. Local, regional, state governments, other than ODOT, transportation providers, tribes, public schools and universities, businesses providing community services, and 501c3 nonprofits are all eligible to apply. As I mentioned, the type of project that we can fund is very flexible. Awarded projects include subsidized fare, e-bike lending library pilots at affordable housing developments, outreach and education, bike repair clinics, just to name a few things. The IMP will also offer competitive grants, and those are set to open at the end of this year. I don't have much to share publicly about these grants just yet. This is also why the table that you saw at the beginning of the transportation looked a little bit blank for the IMP, but please stay tuned as we'll be communicating this funding opportunity and what exactly you can apply for throughout the summer and fall. Next slide, please. Okay, that is the end of my presentation on the Innovative Mobility Program today. Thank you all for your time. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me or the IMP coordinator, Bridget. Our emails are on the slide. You can also sign up for the IMP newsletter on the webpage, which has been linked on the slide as well. Thank you.
So here's just one more page with all the websites listed. And I'll move us to any questions that folks have. Lindsay, I didn't realize that there would be people in the room with you too. So I don't quite know how to navigate that. So I'm hoping you can help us navigate if there are questions for people in the room. And we can let folks put questions in the chat here.
Folks in the room with me, if you have a question, feel free to come over here and I will let you use my computer to ask your question. I also wanted to read off, we had one question earlier that was in the chat, since I know y'all can't see it. So that was, for the carbon reduction program, does the grantee have to be a certified agency per ODOT, or will ODOT administer the grant on their behalf? Which the answer was ODOT will administer on behalf of non-certified agencies. All right. So if there are any other questions in the chat or anyone in the room, feel free to come over here. All right, we have one person in the room coming over.
Hello, this is Jack Plashishin, Safe Routes to School Coordinator at Springfield. My question is about innovative mobility. Will the funds for innovative mobility be subject to federal Buy America requirements?
Sorry, I was finding my unmute button. The short answer is the federal funds will be yes, but we are, again, still designing the program. So we'll have a little bit more information in terms of what the specific restrictions are and what types of projects we're going to fund later.
For the small innovative mobility grants though, Dorian?
Oh, the micro grants, no, the micro grants are only state funded. I was referring to the competitive grants, which are opening later this year. The micro grants are not.
All right, it looks like there are no other questions in the room at this time.
We also don't see any on the chat, but most of our presenters from the ODOT side will be sticking around. I believe Alan has to take off, and we could pause here and pass it on to our other presenter.
Great. Yeah, we can go with that. And then if you guys are thinking about the previous presentation, can you guys see just like a slide?
Yes.
Great, with a beautiful fall scene. Okay, my name is Natasha Riveron. I'm so appreciative of the folks from ODOT sharing information about your grant programs. As somebody who looks at a lot of funding programs in different states, it's really exciting to see the stuff that you guys are doing and trying to get this funding out to communities. Okay, so my name is Natasha Riveron. I introduced myself in the beginning, but I work at Safe Routes Partnership, which was historically a Safe Routes to School organization. And we have expanded a little bit more into getting people to the places that they want to go. And my program particularly is Safe Routes to Parks, but I also am very interested and work on a lot of projects where we're thinking about how to pay for all of the things that we want to see on our roads to make it easier to walk, bike, and make it safer, more equitable, more convenient to get to the places we want to go. So feel free to contact me about any of those things. The mission at Safe Routes Partnership is to advance safe walking and rolling to and from schools and in everyday life, improving the health and well-being of people of all races, income levels, and abilities, and building healthy, thriving communities for everyone. So my goals today are to just introduce you to some federal discretionary grant opportunities. I know that the folks from ODOT shared. Also, I'm so sorry. I need to get rid of I'm having a little bit of an issue with the Zoom. Okay. Learn about some federal discretionary grant opportunities, and then share about an Oregon-specific toolkit that I think could be really helpful. Identify some strategies for making existing funding go further for safe walking and biking, and help you guys recognize what to plug into some existing processes to pay for a bike ped. So this first part is discretionary funds. The most recent federal funding package for transportation made a couple of really exciting new opportunities available. And I'm going to highlight two of those that are particularly relevant to folks wanting to plan for or pay for safer infrastructure. And just to give you a sense of like the discretionary versus formula funds. So formula funds are usually what the state's handling. So those are programs in which states receive an apportionment, which is based on a formula that takes into account things like population. Discretionary funds are awarded directly by USDOT, and they're competitive, and each program has its own guidelines that are informed by Congress, but you are directly applying to the government for them. The one that I really want to highlight is Safe Streets for All. This is all about Vision Zero and Towards Zero Death. There are two grant types, specifically planning and implementation. There's $5 billion available for this program over the 5 years. They just had the last round, the first round, so it's going to be the second round, and it's due, and I just want to highlight this, that it's due July 10th. So if you're able, like if you're like, you know what, we're definitely in, we could totally get an application in, do it. Like there's a lot of funding available for the planning grant specifically. And if not, now's a really great time to start making those connections and start talking about it. Oftentimes I'll talk to people and they're like, shoot, like we just found out about the due date and the due date's tomorrow. It's like, oh, perfect. This is like the perfect time to start planning for next year. The eligible activities are the safety plans and implementation strategies. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about these. And there's so much information that's coming out from USDOT about these, and there's informational webinars. And even if you are not one of the eligible applicants, partnering with them is a really great way to kind of support them doing this kind of planning. And you can influence policies, you can show up and engage when these projects are being discussed. And if you do get the planning grant awarded to your community, then participating in that planning is going to be major. What's exciting about this is that there's so much that can be part of these activities, these planning activities. So you can use planning and demo grants to develop or complete an action plan. You can conduct supplemental planning or do these demonstration activities that will inform an action plan. So the action planning in like the baseline can include the leadership and commitment and goal setting, and that includes the timeline for eliminating roadway fatalities and serious injuries. There's planning structure, so putting together a committee or a task force that's going to be looking at implementation and monitoring the work and making sure that there's transparency. You can do safety analysis, which is all about looking at existing conditions and historical trends, and that can provide a baseline level of crashes involving fatalities and serious injuries in your jurisdiction. The engagement and collaboration piece is super exciting too, because with all of the stakeholders and the partners that you want to be connected into this work, this is a really great place to think about equity and thinking about developing a plan that's inclusive and representative of the people who are most impacted by roadway fatalities and unsafe streets. Thinking about all of these, I'm not going to read through all of these, but the policy and process changes are really exciting because that's how you build this work in over the long term in a really sustainable way. And you can make sure that you're measuring progress over time and getting commitments to that within the plan itself. The supplemental action plans is also really exciting because you can really dig into subtopics of these safety plans. So if your community already has a comprehensive safety plan, you can go further into speed management, an ADA transition plan. You can look into health equity, things like lighting. There's so many things you can go further into. You can do safety audits, more specific equity assessments. So like, do not sleep on these. I feel like sometimes planning grants can be a little less appealing than infrastructure grants because you just want to build the thing, right? But these plans are the pathway to getting both state and federal funding for projects and to make you eligible for the infrastructure grants under Safe Streets for All. One last thing about this is that you can do demo projects with this, and you can do these to sort of just demonstrate the feasibility of a quick build strategy and look at how that it can inform permanent projects in the future. So you could use paint or these like the plastic delineator posts to experiment with roadway design changes or use like removable barriers. There's various engineering studies that you can do to think about ways to apply the MUTCD, the manual uniform traffic control devices. So you can look at warrants for traffic signal installation. I know that here in Seattle, I'm based in Seattle, Washington, we recently changed out the number of people it takes to trigger the installation of a crosswalk, looking at bike lane treatments. You can pilot these programs. Yeah, and it's a really exciting thing that you can use it for because it's an effective way to build support and excitement around this work. Okay, so the second discretionary program I wanted to just highlight really quick is RAISE, and it's formally known as Build or Tiger Grants, and the deadline for applications was on February 28th. But like I said, now is definitely the right time to start thinking about getting together partners, thinking about how you're going to make the match. The selections for this past round will be announced in June, so keep an eye out for that and look at like what were successful applications and think about what could really work in your community. And just to give you a sense of the breadth of these projects, in Tucson, they did a bridge replacement. In Beaverton and Salem, Oregon, they did some planning around complete streets projects. And then there's a new snowmelt system in Berlin, New Hampshire. So there's a lot of ways that this can be used. RAISE projects are usually reviewed on a criteria that include safety, environmental sustainability, quality of life, mobility and community connectivity, and also things like tourism, partnerships and collaboration and innovation. Half of the funding will go to projects in rural areas. So listen out for that, rural areas. Half of the funding will go to projects in urban areas, and then at least 15 million is going to go towards projects located in areas of persistent poverty. And they're actually going to be changing the match percentage for those projects. And just some notes on how to keep up to date, because I know that sometimes it's difficult to keep up to date with all of the updates with these things. We have a federal policy blog that we update. The transportation alternative state implementation tracking we do, but ODOT is pretty good at getting things done. Then we also have lists of projects that are happening, and you can also email me if you have questions about any of the federal things that I mentioned. So next, I'm going to share a little more about strategic stuff and how to make existing funding stretch a little further, and introduce you guys to a toolkit that we created in partnership with folks in Oregon. Before I go any further, please feel free to put in the chat any questions that you have about the federal funding. I just kind of zoomed through that because it's a lot of information, and I'm happy to connect offline as well if you have any questions. My email is up there and I'll leave it at the end as well. And folks who are in person, I don't know, I realize it's a little tougher to get to the chat, so maybe just like note your questions and we can talk after. Okay, so I've been working with the Oregon Health Authority to support safer connections to every destination, but especially parks. And I want to be sure that you guys know about an Oregon specific toolkit and resources that were developed to help improve safe, equitable, convenient access to parks. And the thing about this toolkit is it is parks focused. But ultimately, parks are just one destination in a network, and this toolkit can definitely be used for access to destinations throughout a community. So don't be put off by the park's name. It just happens to be the program that we did it with. And I think what's really important to think about is all of the work that it takes to get to the point where you're competitive for a grant application, or the partnerships you have to build, the information you need to collect. This toolkit is a really helpful way to get to that point. We developed the toolkit with support from folks all throughout Oregon. We met with like 21 individuals from 15 organizations, and we have real life stories about how people use different kinds of funding to pay for infrastructure, programming, and planning. And I highly recommend looking at it. The toolkit really walks you through the process that we use to advance safe routes to parks, as well as things like safe routes to school, safe routes to grocery stores. And we are really excited to share all of the toolkit, like all of the tools that are here. There's like over 20 ideas for funding sources and ideas to creatively use existing funding. And I'm going to highlight some of them in this time, but I definitely can't get to all of them. There's really clear steps and links to tools and templates like planning meeting agendas, or like surveys, or ways to define your roles and the partnerships for safe routes to parks, and thinking about who you need to connect with. There's these guiding questions. And I think another thing that's really important is thinking about ways to, and this is something I talk about a lot with funding, is finding ways to nest this work into something that's already happening. Thinking about opportunities like with Walk with Ease, which is a program to help with folks who are living with arthritis, just thinking about ways that this kind of program, like folks are walking as part of this program. So what can you do as like, you know, an innovative walking and biking advocate to just sort of be like, oh, like maybe we could do a walk audit, like as part of the walking group. Or maybe we talk about opportunities to like advocate at your local city council. So there's just like different opportunities there. And then just, again, the toolbox is a great useful thing. And we have Oregon case studies, which I know people love, from communities like Beaverton, Salem, Eugene, Klamath Falls, Portland, Redmond. Okay. This final bit is all about how to prioritize and partner up to make funding stretch a little further. If new sources of funding aren't in the cards, which a lot of times that's the kind of conversation that I walk into. Sometimes you just need to think about ways to work with what you have. And with a collection of case studies, I'm going to talk through some strategies to. Oh, okay, sorry. I just saw I will answer that question in a bit. I'm going to share a few case studies about moving existing funds toward your goals and the partnerships that can help facilitate both funding and implementation. And the thing is, like, sometimes it's not a matter of whether or not money is available, but rather what it's available for. So existing funding streams and plans are supposed to align with community identified goals, and active transportation is a really great tool for achieving larger goals like climate resilience, improved health, or neighborhood revitalization. So just thinking really broadly about, like, ultimately, like, people may ask for certain things, but really zooming out to what the overall goal is can help bring in multiple partners. So look at established plans and goals and identify like where walking and biking can play in to advance those goals, even if it's in a small way. It's really easy for people to say yes to an opportunity if it's aligned with something that is already established or something that they're already committed to. So I highly recommend looking at plans from across the community, even if you're like not traditionally partnered with certain folks, because that small piece of a plan could be the thing that you can hook into. So one tool that I often point people toward is project prioritization. So what you need to ask is, how are projects currently prioritized? And is there set criteria? Typically, this is the role of the Department of Public Works. So if we're talking about like roadway prioritization. This is Public Works or a similar department that develops the project prioritization guidance and selection processes. So connecting with them to learn a little bit more about how they prioritize and select projects and what could be incorporated to advance safety and access goals is a great way to think about it. So in bigger places, I'm sure this stuff is probably going to be public. But if not, like, call them up. One example that works really well is in the city of Oakland. They use equity as one of 9 factors to prioritize projects in their capital improvement program. And they determine the repair, construction, replacement of everything based with this equity criteria in mind. Something that was a kind of a newsworthy thing about, I don't know, 3-4 years ago, was that they were looking at potholes and choosing, they were like, okay, like we are going to prioritize where we're filling in potholes based on this equity metric. So like really mapping the community and being like high need or like places that are being underserved by the current process of just going where we hear the most voices or we hear the most advocates asking for things. We're going to go where people have been underserved in the past. And that would like totally change the budget, that changed how they were doing things. And it was a really exciting process. So I really recommend, if you want to read more about that, you should look it up. So yeah, take action on this. Like, just look at how your city is currently prioritizing things. What I recommend is that this will look different in every community. So like you want a process that consistently and automatically prioritizes safe infrastructure for active transportation along routes and between important destinations. And then just also like the communities that in your community that you want to prioritize. So like, is that school age children? Is that older adults? Like, what does that look like for you? A lot of times communities will have certain criteria around poverty, or I know the community paths program here, they look at, and the Safe Routes to School program, they look at like the population of low income or Hispanic or folks who have a disability and Title I schools. So like there's lots of different ways to think about this, and I'm happy to chat about it if you want to talk through it for your specific community. Project bundling. So if there are already plans for routine maintenance or other improvements on a portion of a route to a park or a school or a grocery store, like find ways to tack on low cost improvements that align with your needs. So this is what we would call like project bundling. So in Birmingham, Alabama, I worked with this community where there was a park that was in between these 2 neighborhoods with a really rich history of Black residents and small businesses and churches. And the park had really great amenities, but there wasn't any bicycle infrastructure that allowed people to safely ride to and from. And so a nonprofit community development organization saw this as an opportunity to leverage the city's new Complete Streets policy and point out that they wanted safer bike routes. And so they reviewed the paving plans, which the thing is like public works departments will have repaving plans years in advance. Like they have them. So it's just a matter of figuring out how to get that list. And so what they did is they basically connected with this repaving plan and they reviewed it and they scheduled opportunities like, hey, like in 3 years, they're going to be repaving this. They're probably going to be designing this in like a year or 2 ahead of time, probably more. And like specifically advocate for the bike improvements, ask for the things that you need. And they ended up in 2 years later, when the city repaved a portion of that corridor, they ended up striping a bike lane and narrowed the travel lanes to slow car travel, just because it was paint. And so it was a relatively easy yes for the city. I can't guarantee that your city will always say yes, because there may be other factors, but it doesn't hurt to ask. And it doesn't hurt to really like align with something that they're already doing. So an easy next step is to look at your city's repaving and street maintenance schedule and to identify when streets are slated for improvements and see if you can become part of the checklist. Like see if you can get some of that work going. I'm just gonna check the time really quick. Okay. Again, planning, I kind of mentioned this in the beginning, but if a project is part of a larger plan, it's more likely to be included in future funding proposals. And that's why I'm so pro the Safe Streets for All grant, because getting paid to create a plan that can be incorporated is just, it's very, very valuable for getting bigger pots of money. So research the timing for new plans and plan revisions in your jurisdiction so that you can get involved and advocate specifically for getting things on the map. Even if it's just a line on the map in a plan, or just a sentence that gives some kind of commitment to the work that you're doing. Look at your city's planning website and connect with them via phone, call them up, email them, check what plans are required by your state. There are required updates to comprehensive plans every, there's a set number of years that they have to update them. Not that they always do, but yeah, every community is different, but I added some plans just to think about. And these are really good places to incorporate access goals or safe routes to school, and can help support implementation. So for example, a safe routes to school master plan. A safe routes to school is something that's probably really familiar to a lot of us. And just getting some notes in there around equity and figuring out partnerships. Maybe you add in that you want to partner with Parks and Rec folks, and the Parks and Rec folks can be brought to the table and just kind of build in that partnership. The second to last thing I want to share is about data. So I know collecting data can be really, really hard, and it's something that I often will end up thinking about after a project is done, but it is so valuable. So using data to make a really compelling case for your work can go a really long way. And even if it's a small project, it can have a really lasting impact because you have numbers behind it as well as a story. So this little visual is from a story in Wenatchee, Washington, which is this really rural city in a rural town in central Washington. And communities share that the community shared that they did not feel safe walking to a local park because cars didn't stop at the stop signs. And so as part of their assessment phase, they basically just posted up at that intersection and observed and counted the number of cars that came to a complete stop at the signs. And it was not great. A lot of people did not stop there. And then they were like, okay, you know what? As a low cost thing that we can do to try and change this is we're going to add flashing LED lights at the stop signs to improve the visibility and see if more people stop. And it turned out when they did a count again, after installing those LED stop signs, more people actually stopped. And that information about before and after really helped them demonstrate the success of the work, and will help them make a case for future safety improvements. That even if it wasn't a peer-reviewed study, it doesn't have to be totally it doesn't have to be the level that you would publish. I think just getting some numbers does make a big difference. Although a better study is always better, but. And finally, I know that there's a variety of folks here, although I wish that I could see everybody and be there, but you've likely collaborated with people outside of your organizations. And I feel just the power of getting government agencies, decision makers, and community advocates to work together is just an amazing way to achieve shared goals and accomplish even more than you could on your own. And I think some of the things are that you diversify your perspective. When you include new partners and collaborations, you get really fresh ideas, and it doesn't necessarily mean you have more money, but it does mean that you have more capacity, more opportunities, more perspectives, more opportunities to tap into more specialized funding opportunities. And that means that you can access different funding streams. So it's cool. These really varying perspectives enrich us, they make us stronger, and really cover blind spots that we might have otherwise. And it increases our efficiency, which is great. The more that we can balance our workload, the better, because I know that a lot of us spend a lot of time doing a lot of work and it can be overwhelming. And having lots of partners does increase our ability to continue the work for the long term, which is in transportation is what we need to be doing. So think about what your organization has. Like, do you guys have standard checklists or coalitions that you work with? Like, are there ways that we can broaden who our partnerships are? So, you know, schools, transit, public health. I know public health is a pretty common group, but libraries are a partner that I feel like have been showing up a lot more in the last few years. Librarians are community resources beyond just books. They connect people to so many things, and they're creative and interesting, and they're physical places that are wonderful for meetings and other like creative activities. Stormwater, faith communities, artists, sports leagues are like wonderful, energetic partners. So I just like really want to encourage you to think really outside the box when it comes to your partners. And I'm going to jump into specifically stormwater, which this also kind of relates back to the list of thinking about like, when are there stormwater improvements happening? When are there repaving projects happening? Curb extensions can be a really visually and physically narrow thing to kind of like bring down the roadway width, and it can create shorter and safer crossings for pedestrians, but it also can create these like wonderful stormwater treatment features. The available space generated by curb extensions can do double, triple duty. So like, don't overlook this. Permeable pavement, just like thinking about when your community is doing the stormwater work is just like really plug into that. And there's so many resources about how to sort of pair these safe road infrastructure pieces with this sort of priority of dealing with stormwater. And especially being in the Pacific Northwest, it's a priority. The picture on the right is in Portland, Oregon, actually. And stormwater upgrades helped improve a pocket park, which increased safety for the neighborhood bikeway. And this project came together through a collaboration between a couple different parties. So the Portland Bureau of Transportation wanted to divert traffic at this block, and they wanted to improve a bike boulevard. And then the neighborhood was interested in making a park improvement. And then the Bureau of Environmental Services wanted to decrease unnecessary impervious surfaces and then enhance opportunities for stormwater management. And so all three of these goals were achieved with a little bit of funding from the EPA Innovative Wet Weather Program to narrow the travel lanes, decrease impervious surface area, and then improve a park in the neighborhood. And so residents of the neighborhood participated in the design and also requested more seating and an area for a kiosk. So I think that's just a great example of multiple goals getting addressed all at once. And then I would be remiss to not mention that schools are an incredible partner. I won't go very much more into this because I know that Safe Routes to School is a fairly familiar concept for everyone. And I just want to, like, if you're not already working with schools, the opportunities that are available in Oregon for Safe Routes to School are almost like nearly unmatched. It's really impressive what the state is doing. And this is one of the most exciting programs in the country. And the work that they do the work that like Safe Routes to School programs do to connect schools contribute to an overall network in neighborhoods and in broader communities. So like, if you're not already sort of connected to Safe Routes to School work in your community, please go ahead and do it. And then finally, these like, I think like sometimes as somebody who like is working at a national level, like it's like, oh, like we're looking for these like big funding opportunities. But like the volunteer groups, hosting fundraisers, building support, building energy, getting people out on the street and like biking and walking together. And like sometimes like in my neighborhood, like sometimes we get together, just like prune back bushes that are like impeding the sidewalk. And like, don't dismiss that this is like a really powerful way to continue the movement. So thinking about like social groups or faith communities, they can be a really powerful force for improving and maintaining safe routes to places. and giving these groups the ability to manage the city-owned land. This is something that is often common in Friends of the Park groups. So like if you have Friends of the Park groups that are like that have like a route through that park that connects to a school or something, like connect with them. It's a really powerful force for good in communities. And so in closing, and I think I would extend this to maybe the previous presentation as well, maybe. So I would love to hear maybe in the Q&A, like what is something new or interesting to you that you heard today in this presentation or the previous one? And we'd love to hear it in the chat box, or maybe say it out loud in the room and when we're in the Q&A. And then is there an idea or a funding opportunity that you want to learn more about? Like, what are you going to go look up when you go home tonight? And is there information you need or somebody that you need to talk to? So do you need to go talk to like your colleague? Do you need to go talk to somebody who's a partner, maybe at the city, or maybe an organizational partner? And then I just want one last plug that I actually have some funded time to help out with implementing like safe routes to parks and thinking about connecting to those sort of federal opportunities through the Oregon Health Authority, with a particular emphasis on older adults and folks who have arthritis, because that's just the funding stream. And so if you are interested in any of the things that I mentioned today, like please feel free to reach out to me. I'm like happy to help. Great, so let's do some questions. I will stop sharing.
There was a question from Lindsay from the room earlier.
Yeah, can any grant opportunities mentioned so far be used for projects on ODOT roads, even those grant opportunities distributed through ODOT? That seems like a question for also ODOT.
I think that I can say yes for safe routes to school construction, and I am like 99% sure that it is yes for the community paths program as well. Right.
Also a yes for carbon reduction program.
So if the person who asked that question,
We have someone in the room saying that it can't be used for the community paths.
cannot be used.
Well, because they're off-road projects.
Cross.
Oh, right. Unless it's crossing. I believe it can cross ODOT right of way. You just have to work with ODOT to get the right cost estimate, get the right design that can be built on ODOT right of way, which has sometimes has stricter guidelines than building on local right of way. So I believe a community paths project can cross ODOT right of way. But reach out to Alan specifically, Alan Thompson, and I'll put his email address in the chat.
And it looks like we have no other questions in here at the moment.
Cool. I guess I have a question for folks in the room or online. Are you guys thinking about did you come to this session with a specific project in mind or something that you're like trying to figure out? Like, I'd love to hear what you sort of like brought to the session in your mind as you were like listening through opportunities. Even if you could just put it in the chat box, I'd love to hear what you guys are thinking about and working on.
Does anyone want to say? I've got it unmuted.
Is everyone asleep in the marshals?
I know it's like it's very end of the day. It's a tough time to be.
Jordan's still awake. What do you got, Jordan?
Yep, I'm awake. I'm here. Well, I work for Westside Transportation Alliance. So we're a TMA in Washington County, and we're doing a lot of work around trying to promote sustainable commuting doing e-bike trial periods and starting with the city of Tigard on a micro bike share at a couple of affordable housing projects. And constantly the barrier that we're running into is, even though we're basically handing out these e-bikes either for free or for extremely low subsidized costs, people come back and say, I had a wonderful time and really enjoyed it and want to change my habits and commute habits, but the infrastructure is just not there. And with 3 people on our team, it's really hard to keep track of so many of these different projects that are happening. And I just went to an open house for the Denny Road reconstruction project east of Highway 217. And it was really hard, being one person there trying to voice the concerns of someone who advocates for active transit, an organization that advocates for active transit and commuting, trying to put in that word. Meanwhile, you have all the residents from the surrounding community there saying that they don't want bike lanes and they don't want sidewalks. So it's very difficult to do the work, but it's necessary. And thank you, both ODOT and Natasha from Safe Routes, for your presentation today. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Jordan, you're doing really good work. I want to be keep going. I know it can be really hard. When before I worked at ODOT, I used to say and it's actually, this is still true, but it's it takes 8 no's to get a yes. And so every time I got a no, I would just cross it off my list, because it's one less no, that one down. I'm closer to the yes now. And I just want to say thank you for your work going out and advocating for pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. It's really important.
Thank you, LeeAnne. Things, even though there are a lot of no's, things are always getting better. So it's very nice to see that.
Yeah, and I think that just points to how essential a comprehensive plan of some kind, road safety plans, vision, having a plan that has everything as opposed to one-off projects, so you don't have to keep on going to a meeting for every single project where it's you're doing it piecemeal throughout the community. It really is I don't know. That's why I'm always you got to get it in a plan, guys. You got to get it in a plan, a comprehensive thing of some kind. Oh, and I see a question here from Danny. Hi there, doing Safe Routes to School strategic and master planning in the next year and looking to go after federal and state funding later 2023 into 24. Also interested in IMP. That's great, Danny.
Great.
Yeah, the strategic, it's I feel like a broken record, but it's you get things in a plan and it's so much easier to, I mean, I know that it is the criteria for a lot of scoring.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
I'm yelling at a computer. I'm so sorry.
No, it's great.
So this is Danny. I'm in that room of a lot of awesome people. And I just wanted to add, we're also updating our transportation safety action plan and looking at our bike ped CIP in the next 12 months. And I'm fortunate enough to sit in a position where I co-lead those efforts. And so just thinking about the strategic and master planning for safe routes and how we make the assertion, not only to our electeds, but also within our community, commitments to say, hey, this is how we leverage this and how we pull it into plans across the board, so that things like IMP and hopefully things like SS4A are reality.
Totally. Yeah. Yes. I was gonna, you got it. I don't know. Yeah.
Thank you all. Thank you all. This is wonderful.
Danny, have you looked at this mini grants, the innovative mobility mini grants?
Oh, I sure have. I've got a few meetings with a few partners, and I'm just let's do it, guys.
Yeah,
Nice.
I think the maximum is 2 per calendar year for any particular organization, but they're real flexible and they're $5,000. So there's a great opportunity to do some
That goes a long way.
engagement work. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have no other questions, it looks like, in the room.
Don't see any more hands raised. We can let y'all go 6 minutes.
Yeah.
early.
All
Yeah, thanks
right.
for hanging in with us. About
Yeah, and thank you to you all as well. And thank you to our 2023 sponsors too. Sked is the place to go to see all the presentation descriptions and room assignments. And there's also printouts of the schedule available in Marshall's as well. So, all right. See you all later.
all right,
Thanks,
folks, bye.
everyone.
I think about an open house.